What is up guys, it is Aaron from Rudy Visuals, and in today's video we are going to give you our top 10 tips when it comes to shooting portraits. Okay, so I'm gonna do my best to give you these top 10 tips and keep it as concise as possible. So without further ado, let's get straight into it. Okay, so tip number 1 is to be well prepared. So this includes doing as much planning as possible. There is definitely nothing worse than an unprepared photographer. So do your planning, do your preparation. That includes things like location. It includes things like doing research when it comes to like what kind of lighting you're gonna get, what equipment you're gonna bring, outfits. So that when it comes to actually doing your portrait session, you are as well prepared as you can possibly be. Now, a little tip that I like to use is I like to use Pinterest and make Pinterest boards so that you can show your model what kind of styles you're going for, what kind of like mood, what kind of outfits. So I definitely recommend using Pinterest to coordinate your shoots with your model. So tip number 2 is to be sociable. The only worst thing than an unprepared photographer is an unsociable photographer. So for me, it can be like really awkward when you see photographers with models and then the photographer like hardly talks at all during the shoot. This can create like a really awkward atmosphere and it's not gonna get the best out of you, your work, and the best out of your model too. So you wanna keep the energy levels high, you wanna be giving constant feedback to your model throughout the shoot. It definitely helps to break the ice, say if it's like the first time you're meeting them, just for getting to know each other a little bit better, tell a joke. I like to use kind of like these warm-up exercises where I get the model to kind of like move back and forth, or maybe like do spins, just to kind of like get them out of their shell, and it helps kind of break the ice a little bit and kind of sets like a fun sort of tone. Of course, it also helps if you already know who it is you're shooting and you already have that little bit of rapport. But if not, at the very minimum, you know, give constant feedback, tell your model that they're doing a good job or give them things to work on, but just ensure that there's constant communication throughout. Tip number 3 is kind of related to tip number 2, but it's to use props. So having props is a really easy way to like help your model feel at ease when it comes to portrait shoots. This also ties into like shooting like children or even pets, but using props like fun things that they can hold to play with. We've used things like umbrellas, fans. You can use like a smoking pipe. We've used a baseball bat. It can also be really nice to ask the model, ask about their hobbies, ask about what they're passionate about, and then they can bring those things into their shoot. So for example, like musicians are a really easy example to give. If you've got someone who plays guitar or violin, that's a really easy prop. And that can really help bring the model's like personality and passion through in the image. But you can use really simple props too, like just picking up a flower can serve as a really useful prop for a portrait session. So tip number 4 is to use a shallow depth of field. So usually anything above say f2.8, f1.8 is great. If you have anything, they can go higher than that. Using a shallow depth of field, you know, as you know, creates that really nice bokeh and background blur. And this just makes your subject stand out so much more. So it does help with portraits if you use a shallow depth of field. If you have a shallow depth of field, you can also put things like in front of the lens, and that kind of creates like a nice sort of 3D pop effect, adding a little extra dimension and interest to your portraits. Tip number 5 is to use prime lenses. So typically we use an 85mm prime. Sometimes we use a 50mm prime, but prime lenses tend to be a little bit optically better. They're a little bit sharper. The image quality is definitely a big improvement over like a zoom lens. Luckily, there are quite a few good budget options out there. We've talked about the 85mm f1.8 Canon and also the nifty 50 Canon are really great options. But whether you're shooting on Canon, Sony, Nikon, there are some very affordable lenses when it comes to 50s and 85 primes. So definitely check them out. And if you can, use prime lenses in your portrait sessions. Tip number 6 is not to be afraid to break the rules. So there are rules like I've sort of talked about in terms of using prime lenses and using background blur, using depth of field, but you don't have to stick to these conventions. You can shoot at higher apertures. You can use super wide angle lenses. I've seen people take really interesting portraits with like fisheye type lenses. So portrait photography is definitely an area where there is room for experimentation. So don't be afraid to break the norms, to try something something new. So tip number 7 is something we've made a video about previously. It's to tell a story. So by adding some kind of narrative into your portrait pictures, you can really make that image stand out far more than if you were just to shoot like a standard model with a standard pose. You can tell a story in numerous ways by adding props, your style of lighting, the way you pose your model, facial expressions, lots of different ways here. Definitely recommend you check out our video on that. But definitely the images that tell a story, those ones stand out so much more than the ones that don't. Tip number 8 is to focus on the eye. So this is definitely something you always definitely want to do. The eyes are kind of like the window of the soul, and portrait images, it's so important that you get those eyes nice and sharp in focus. People often say that you can see so much more through the eyes than through any other part of the body, and I do kind of feel that's sort of true. So no matter what kind of style of portrait you're shooting, you do kind of want to focus on the eyes. That being said, you know, depending on the style of picture you're going for, sometimes I've seen pictures where things are like in front of the camera and the eyes aren't in focus. That can be cool too if you're trying to draw attention to like a particular object. But generally speaking, you want the eye to be in focus. Okay, my 9th tip is to keep the lighting nice and simple. I think a common a trap that some portrait photographers get into is by overcomplicating lighting setups. So they bring like 2, 3, 4 lights with them on their shoots. They're carrying all these extra things with them. And sometimes the image can be just as nice using just a simple flash 1 light setup, or even just using natural light. Sometimes a cloudy overcast day can just look a bit more natural than having a bunch of lights. That being said, there is a time and a place for using multiple lights if you're going for like a specific look or a specific kind of style. However, we like to keep things as simple as possible on this channel, especially when you're first starting out, you're trying to learn other things like posing, like composition, or even just learning your camera. Adding like that extra element, it can confuse people a little bit. So just keep it simple when it comes to lighting. Very quick side tip, if you want to use the best kind of lighting for portraits, we do find that golden hour, so between sunrise or sunset, tends to be like the most flattering light when it comes to like making people look good. So it can definitely be nice to plan your shoots around those times. Other than that, a nice cloudy overcast day is also really good because the light is nice and even. So that's definitely better than having like harsh shadows on a sunny day. Okay, and my 10th and final tip is not to be afraid to crop in post. So there is this really big debate amongst photographers whether you should crop or you shouldn't crop, whether you should crop in camera rather than in post. But on this channel, we're definitely on the side of crop if you need to crop. If you have an image that could have better composition or have a better result or a better sort of feel, which can be achieved through cropping, then why wouldn't you crop? Cropping is definitely a viable option in our opinion. Anyway guys, there you have it. Those are our top 10 tips when it comes to shooting portraits. Hopefully you found that useful. As always, if you have any questions at all, please feel free to ask them in the comment section below. If you like this video, give it a like, help us out and hit that subscribe button. If you would like to see more of our work, you can follow us down here on Instagram and Facebook. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Thank you so much again for watching. I guess I'll see you on the next video. All right.